Rob Ruckus.
Hey, this is Kate Clover.
Hey guys, it's Nick Collins here from The Effect and Better Strangers.
Hi, my name is Madeline Rose.
Hey, it's Ben McKelvey.
It's Tim Howard here from Mike and the Mechanics.
Hello, I'm Amanda Lehmann.
I'm Billy Harvey.
What's going on, everybody? I'm Casey Sampson from the band Twist Stop.
Hey, it's Tony from Fastball.
Hello, everybody. My name is Isaiah Mitchell.
Hey guys, it's Matt here from the White Lakes.
You're listening to Almost Famous Magazine.
Come join us for this interview. Check it out, Almost Famous Magazine.
Hey there, everyone. Thank you for coming back for another hang here on Almost Famous Magazine. Very excited today to have an opportunity to talk with my guest here, Amanda Lehmann, who's a massively impressive musician. I envy her career. She has a tremendous musical resume going back for many studio recordings, live performances, and she's had a chance to work with some of the best prog rock musicians the world has ever known. So it's a very impressive resume. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for asking me.
Oh, absolutely. I've been looking forward to this. One thing I also mentioned, for those of you who have not experienced her music before, she did put out an album in 2021, Innocence and Illusion. We'll hit on a little bit of how that all came together in our conversation. I always kind of try to start these off with an interesting question, because it's different for everyone. Your musical journey, did it start because you found music, or did music find you?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? I think I can't remember, in the sense that I've always loved music. So I can't remember a time when music wasn't part of my life. I know I used to sing when I was tiny. I was always very affected by music emotionally. I was always moved by music. I can remember, even as a really small child, cutting up pieces of paper to make them look like records, and sort of like writing random songs about my imaginary frogs or whatever. So I've always been into music, and there was always a lot of music in the house when I grew up, mostly classical music, because my dad was a violinist. And so I've just always been immersed in music. So I guess you could say that music found me, because it was kind of there and I arrived into it, as it were. Yeah.
That's great. What are your first recollections of making a commitment to learning to play an instrument and learning to start the process of figuring out how to make it yourself?
Okay. I suppose it was a journey of again, when I was little and at school, the first opportunity I had to learn the recorder, I took it. I wanted to do it. I was interested, and I wanted to play with other people as well. So I was in a group, and so you get that wonderful thing of lots of sort of instruments playing. And so that sort of developed into the instrument I really wanted to play was the piano. And obviously, it was a while before we got a piano. There wasn't one in the house, but eventually one was found for me. And that, I think, was really sort of when my journey sort of took on sort of a better kind of turn, as it were, because I could really branch out then. And most of my piano was classically trained. I did lessons, and I did some of the exams, and that was kind of the route I was on. But kind of like in tandem with this was this kind of fascination with music and wanting to perform. And I always wanted to perform. And I think that's where the guitar came in, because the guitar to me was the kind of instrument you could pick up and sing with. You could write songs for it. I found that very tangible. So that was the next instrument I wanted to get and learn to play was the guitar, because that was then my route to actually being able to perform with it. So yeah, it was sort of, yes, a twisty-turny route, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's life never seems to be a straight line, does it?
No.
So it's always an interesting path. I mean, many times we think we're going to go from A to B, and there's about 35 points in between. So let me ask you this. you said that you started really kind of in a classical mode, right? Um, who were some of your early musical influences, and how did you come to kind of formulate or decide that moving toward that the kind of the prog rock world would be that where you kind of wanted to land? Was it that classical influence, and we all kind of know that there's a lot of that in prog, or were there other genres of music that spurred your interest along the way that got you thinking, okay, maybe this direction or that direction?
I can only assume that classical music was a big part of the kind of music I went on to develop enjoying, because I absorbed so much classical music when I was small. And I was quite young when I became aware of the Beatles. And that was interesting because I loved the Beatles, and we got kind of their albums one at a time sort of thing. And as the albums progressed, I got more and more into them because I really enjoyed the later material that they did. The White Album, Let It Be, Abbey Road, all of those later albums. That the music I found much more engaging, even though I loved the early stuff as well. So I think even then there was that whole sort of classical kind of influence there for me. So when I first heard my prog music, which was Genesis, Wind and Wuthering, that really did click. And the other one at the same time I came across was Tales of Mystery and Imagination, with the all that sort of beautiful, the Alan Parsons, all the beautiful kind of dramatic and pictorial music that creates. So those two albums for me, I could just sit there and just float away, because it kind of connected modern music with all that wonderful sort of orchestral music. And I just like very visual music, and I also like music that's moving. So those really did sort of work out for me. And alongside that, I also got very much into the rock side of music. That was probably, again, a similar time, around about when I was 10, and all this music sort of converged. And I think that the whole rock side, which developed into a real love of like heavy metal, it was another thing. It was very connected to a kind of like an armoring, because when you're a kid and life can be quite difficult at times, and other kids are horrible and all this sort of thing. And that was my way through. I wasn't very good at handling it verbally, but I found that music again was a really, really good sort of cure for me, that made me feel a lot better. I'd listen to it and identify with it. So alongside, there was all this very dark kind of like angry music as well. So it was this big sort of gamut of different colours. And music has just been so important long before I was even performing it. It was always very important.
Yeah. What's interesting, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but I had an aunt who had a home, and if you went in her basement, it always had this certain smell. I don't know what it was. It was kind of a musty smell. And if I ever smell that somewhere else, it takes me back to that moment. And music seems to have that same quality, right? You remember the first time you heard a song or somewhere that you were listening to it. And I think that's one of the great joys of having that engulf your life, because it creates those moments.
It does, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you've been on more recordings than we have time to discuss today. So I don't want to choose one out of many personally, but I'm interested. And is there one album, one studio album that you've worked on, not your own, because we'll talk about that in a little bit, that one performance stands out for you? It may be your pride and joy, or it could have created a challenge for you that you had to overcome to get it the way that you or that artist wanted it. Is there any one that really stands out in your career?
Let me think, because they're all a bit of a challenge, really, in different ways, aren't they? I'm trying to think if there's one that really stands out. as I'm trying to kind of go back a bit really and see if there was anything, because I'm thinking really in my earlier years. I mean, now I do so much that, you know, I'm sort of used to a challenge, so nothing stands out, if you know what I mean. And I think that when I was very first recording, if I go back to being like in my late teens, and the challenge of the joy of recording and finding you can like layer harmonies and stuff like that. But also, I think that what really stood out for me was how much you hear back. So you think in your head something sounds a certain way, and then you learn when you hear it back. It's a bit like people say, "Oh, I hate hearing my speaking voice," or whatever. And it's a similar thing. You know, you hear your singing voice back. And I think for me that was really, really useful, because I didn't like the way I sounded when I sung. So hearing back some of the early things I recorded of my own, I then learnt to kind of change the way I sung things to actually make it sound more like I wanted to. So I started studying vocal styles that I really liked, like Stevie Nicks or Pat Benatar or Joni Mitchell, or all sorts of different styles, and trying to like mimic them and work out what they were doing, what their techniques were. So in a way, I think those early recordings I did that were my own, and nobody knows what they are because I don't put them out in the public domain, so it's not very helpful, is it? But yeah, I think that really those, if I think of standout recordings and what I really did learn by those early ones, I think do sort of stand out for me.
Oh, that's a great story. I mean, you learned something that you were able to take further into your career
Yeah,
and make changes. So I think look,
yeah.
if we don't learn, what happens, right? We're doomed to just continue to do the same thing. So you know, who wants to do the same thing over and over again? I know that you have a lot of different endeavors that bring you joy in life. What are some of the things that bring you that creative inspiration? Where are places that you find that inspiration, whether it be in, from music or from art, or, what do you connect with, and how does it enrich you and inspire you to be creative yourself?
All sorts. That's a bit of a general answer. Um,
Well, I mean,
I get,
is there one thing, one thing in particular? It doesn't have to be everything, but, like there's something something gets you, you know what I mean? Like that one thing that just latches onto you. Do you have one of
yeah,
those?
I think, well, I would say one of the things is listening to other people's music. I'll be listening on, like on the radio, or just putting a CD on, and something will trigger. It depends on my mood. One day it would trigger, another day it wouldn't. But suddenly it's like an idea triggers. Um, and I think, oh, I've just had a thought. And I turn off what I'm listening to, which is most disrespectful. I'll go off and just start kind of thinking about this idea that's been triggered. But I do also get a lot of ideas when I'm out walking. So I walk my dog, and I get so many ideas when I'm doing that, because I think when I go out walking, I've let all the kind of, I'm not sort of thinking about my phone. I don't look at my phone when I walk unless I have to or something. And I'm not, I'm not at home. I'm not at a venue. I'm not anywhere. I'm just walking freely. And that, I think, it's just like the creative kind of mechanism, and my mind just sort of starts waking up, or I'll have some thoughts, and then suddenly that turns into a song, or another song that I've been working on will then sort of re-emerge, and then I'll have some really good ideas for that. And I think it's that freedom, and you're just surrounded by kind of like trees and just general life. And I find that a very inspirational time. I've written so many of my songs walking the dog. I can actually sort of think of bits of songs, and I think, oh, I know exactly where I was when I wrote that line. I was at the end of such and such a street. It's really
Can we
strange.
expect a future song about dog walking then?
I should do, really, shouldn't I? Yes.
I mean, a lot of people write about the things they love. You love your dog, and
Yeah.
you're inspired by a dog. I think that's great. And that dovetails well into, you've had this long career of playing live with a wide variety of musicians. And then in 2021, your own solo album came out. What inspired you, and what was the germination of that? When did it start? How long did that journey take? And what did you take away from that journey? What did that mean to you to put all it together?
It started again. It's been in the making, in a sense, the whole time I've been making music, which sounds a bit sort of, but it's true. And I think that there were some albums I did early on that, like I say, that I've never released them because the recordings aren't good enough. When you're doing things on a shoestring, and then I did release a couple of albums. As a duo album I did, called the Wazoon duo album, and I released my EP with 4 tracks on it, which was going to be the album. Those 4 tracks, it was always I was going to add to it, and so it was kind of that was a sort of a bit of a long line. And then getting nearer to when I did actually start work on my album, I thought, no, I think I will actually start this from scratch, because people have bought the EP, people know it, they don't want to hear those songs all over again. So that's it, I'm going to start from scratch. But it was interesting because some of the music that I'd written back in sort of the 80s, 90s, I used a couple of say really old songs, like The Watcher. That was one that I wrote when I was doing a lot of live work with my old band. And so I might sort of give them a bit of a different treatment, rework them, because as we go on, we sort of learn new techniques and tricks and things, and your whole sort of way of seeing things changes. So there was a lot of material that was sort of there, and I wrote a lot of new material and took bits of things and put them together with new stuff and old stuff. And so it was all sort of fairly organic, if you like. And it's been, I've been wanting to get this album done for so long. And I think because I was so busy, whether it was with touring or life, or, having a child, these things just kept happening and taking priority, and an album just didn't happen. And eventually I started I recorded Memory Lane and Only Happy When It Rains. And that was the real start. Right, okay, I've got 2 done. Let's get on with this. And then lockdown happened. And during that time, although I was still busy, I was able to do a lot more recording, and with the wonderful ability of being able to remotely send stuff to, other musicians who were involved as well, and get their parts as well sent to me. So that worked very well. And though you had another question. What was the second question? What did it? I can't remember what you said now.
What the whole birthing the album, so to say, right? And obviously this was a long gestation.
Yes.
You may break a Peter Gabriel record, because I think, what is it, 16 years he has between albums? So maybe you get the award from day one of conception to putting out the album. But look, everyone's got to have goals, right? But like, what did that, once you finally got it out, and it was a whole package, and you had these gems, how did it feel to finally, after all that time, be able to present that to the world, and then give what meant so much to you to them, right, to people who listen to it?
Well, I think at first it was a bit scary, because you put so much of yourself into these things that it makes you quite vulnerable, because you're almost saying, this is me, sort of thing, and you obviously want to receive good feedback, because otherwise it was almost like you're sort of personally kind of not liked. And so it's a funny thing, it does make you quite vulnerable, either whether you're recording and people are listening to stuff, or whether you're on stage singing your own material. And it was received really well, which was very special, really, really special. And I think I find when I write music, I want to get it out to people. It's like having a thought, you want to have a conversation, you want to speak to a friend, whatever it is, you want to get it out and have that sort of that feedback. I don't find it's enough just to have the music just for me. I want to share it. I want to communicate with it. And I think that it's such a wonderful language, music. It's been amazing just hearing people's interpretation of the songs, what it means to them. I find that fascinating. Just songs like The Watcher, again, talking about that one again. What is The Watcher for you? And the different interpretations of that song that come back are fascinating. So it's lovely because that album is my album, and I've gone, phew, and it's gone out into the ether, and it's become everybody else's album because it's theirs and they enjoy it. And it's just, for me, that is absolutely lovely. And I can't wait to do it again with the next one. So it's exciting.
Well, you've absolutely beaten me to my next question, but I ended up with thinking about something while you were talking. So we'll vulnerability, not always the easiest thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just speaking with a very young musician a few days ago, and she struggled with that, right? She didn't want the world to know who she really was. She wanted to create this thing. And then suddenly, and a little bit because of COVID, she was able to finally find a way to express herself and become vulnerable. Did you ever have that, struggle with vulnerability, or is it an evolving thing for you? And how do you work vulnerability into your lyrics and how you create?
Yes, definitely always had a vulnerability. I think most of us do, but some kind of perhaps have a better sort of a thicker skin than other. I don't know. We all have a different way of functioning in the world. And I covered a lot of my vulnerability up with things like, the music I chose, very dark, angry sort of music, and wore sort of angry clothes. And that sort of saw me through quite, some difficult times. And it's funny because I wore that armor for a long time, and I still do a little bit. And you kind of peep out from it gradually. I think that we all have different ways. That was my way of coping with it. We all have different ways of coping with it, and some people just go through life being an open book and just learn to kind of navigate around it. And I think there's so many different ways of dealing with vulnerability, but it's I would say it's only in recent years I've felt brave enough, courageous enough to actually allow that through and to risk presenting a more authentic self to the world rather than the kind of rock chick thing, which I still love because I love doing the rock chick thing, but I think that I don't hide behind it anymore to the same extent that I used to. It's a really useful thing, I think, to have your own armor, and I don't regret any of that. I think that is all part of who I am now. It's become part of who I've become. But it's nice to be able to stand there on stage and just break everything down to tiny little kind of vulnerable lyrics, almost silent in places, and people don't shout you and tell you to go away because it's resonating with them. I think if you can authentically do it, then people, if they're in a receptive mood, you've got to be right place, right time, but it's like it communicates with their own vulnerability, and we've all got it. And it's not all about me. I like to have things that resonate with somebody else or a group of people. I think that's really important. And Yeah, I think that it's a complicated subject, being vulnerable musically, but it can be done.
You brought up an interesting point that's actually come up in a couple of conversations I've had recently about the silence. That sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
As opposed to, in a prior conversation, we're talking about, just somebody shredding, and that's all they did was shred. There's no space between the notes.
Yeah.
And you kind of build this wall of noise that becomes, it's like it's impenetrable, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
being able to find the ability, I think, is amazing to have that quietness and that calm that really opens you up. And I think it takes a lot to get to that place.
It does. Yes. Yes, it's very easy to fill something with noise. Um, I think we're doing my acoustic shows at the moment. I will just go to some really quiet bits, and so you can hear a pin drop. And I think that that requires respectful audiences, of course, which I've been very fortunate to have. But yes, I think that there needs to be white space. I'm really into white space. I need white space in my life. If I haven't got somewhere to go, if there's too much noise and cacophony, I can't cope with that. I have to have somewhere to go, and I have to have that space. So I think I find in music, if it's just too much, you just think, oh, it gets wearing after a while, and it's really nice to have some space, as you say, in the music as well, and some textures, and yeah, definitely.
I've talked to a number of musicians, and one of the hardest lessons that people end up learning is that less is more.
Yes.
Because once you learn to do something, and this goes with, I think, either professional musicians or, like, I was talking to someone yesterday who's taking guitar lessons, and he's struggling because he wants to go from one chord to the other really quick. And just take your time, break it down, find your muscle memory. You'll get there eventually. And then people just want to. It's like a shot out of a cannon, right? They just want to go. It takes, I think, musical maturity and emotional maturity to pull it all back.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I want to hit on another point before we pivot again, but the rocker chick persona that you brought up. Hey, for young female musicians, because I think empowerment is important. What are some things that you have done that have helped you cope with the fact that you're a rocker chick in a very male-dominated industry, but even more so getting into prog rock, right? I mean, there's not a lot of women in your genre. For young female musicians who are venturing out, finding whatever genre they want to get into, what are some of the things that you've learned that you can impart upon them that can help them early in their career and earlier in their decision making?
I think you have to be a bit rubbery. I think you have to let stuff bounce off if you possibly can, because it's hard to avoid getting imposter syndrome. I think that it depends on the kind of person you are, of course, but if you're some people have a lot of confidence, and maybe, you get some people who you just think, oh God, really? But they think they're wonderful. So, you get all sorts. But if we're talking about people who are struggling with it and find it difficult, I think that, you certainly have to keep going. There will be times when you think, oh, I don't know, is this, you get self-doubt. I think you just have to pick yourself up, you get up and you carry on. You might have some times when you take a break from it, but it's in there. It's in there. If you love music, you want to do it, it won't leave you alone anyway. So you pick yourself up, get on with it. And I think that having some kind of self-belief. So you can do that through just knowing that you're practicing a lot. You can do that through performing to, I don't know, maybe a small group of people who give you good feedback, or picking and choosing where you play. You can certainly do that if you're involved with musicians, other musicians who give you good feedback. That's really hard if you're in amongst people and you are not recognized. If, you know, whether that's other women, which can happen, women can be horrid to each other, or whether it's with guys who are a bit, you know, sort of boys club. And there's a lot of that around. There's a lot of it in prog. Whichever it is, it can be very, very demoralizing and difficult if you're getting either negative feedback or you're kind of getting no feedback, as if like, you know, and that's hard. And you just have to get through that. You have to just believe in yourself. You have to think, okay, I'm just going to get better then. Sod this, I'm going to get better. And I'm going to just, you know, practice, or I'm going to study this, that, or the other, and see what are, you know, am I lacking something? What can I do? Because you can't do anything about them. You can't change that. All you can do is make yourself better. And if it's what you really want to do, then do it and just keep at it. Don't give up.
I think that's great advice. So we finally got through a little of that. Now let's talk about your next solo album. What can we expect? Do you have you decided if it's going to be, you know, a number of years away? You know, what are you putting together, and when can people expect to hear some more fabulous music from you?
Well, it's I don't dare put a date on it at the moment because, you know, how long's a piece of string, but it's certainly in the making. I have an awful lot of material that's written for it. I've started recording it, but I need more big chunks of time. I've been very, very busy over the last couple of years. I've done a lot of collaborations with other people, other musicians, and fantastic albums I've contributed vocals and guitar for. And I've been busy with the live work and putting the live set together and gigging. And as you know, day to day getting by. And I think that what I'm doing now is putting by chunks of time to get on with this recording, because I'm excited about this next album. I've got a theme. I know it's not a concept album as such, but it has a theme, a bit like Innocence and Illusion had a theme. And I won't give you any spoilers yet, but what I will say is some of the conversations we've had today, I would say, are not sort of unrelated to some of the themes that this album will have. And I'm very excited about it. I think it's funny when you do a follow-up album, as this one will be considered to be. It's always harder in a sense because there's expectations with it, so you want it to be as good or better than the last one, so you put pressure on yourself. You think, well, it needs to be similar to that one, but not too similar. So it's a question of having the freedom just to write what you like and write those songs, but at the same time thinking, yes, it's got to be, you know, a certain way. But I'm very restless with music. I do like to do this and this and this, as with Innocence and Illusion. There's different genres on there. It's not just sort of prog, although prog really surely in its nature has the capacity to encompass lots of different genres anyway. But yeah, so it's coming along really well. I can't put a date on it yet, but it's definitely in the making.
Well, hey, that's great news for everyone who's either heard the first album, or, as I encourage people to do in these conversations, go buy it. The best way to support musicians, go buy it. Go support them. You can purchase Amanda's music online. You know, artists such as yourself bring these things to us, and if we don't support you, you can't create and bring it to us. So I highly support that. Now, this kind of ties into your next album. I don't know if this could happen on your next album, but everyone throws around bucket lists in life, right? They want to climb Everest, whatever. You had an opportunity in your career to work with some incredible musicians. But is there one musician that you've always wanted to work with, to get in a studio, be creative with, but haven't had an opportunity to? And why that individual? Do you have a dream collaboration?
I think the dream collaboration is Nancy Wilson, because she, for a female artist, she's kind of like my icon, really. And she also comes across as a really nice person. And I think I'd get on with her. She seems to have a good sense of humour. I think we get on. I think if you're going to collaborate with anybody, you have to get on with them. And I love her guitar styles. I love her whole demeanour. I think it'd be really, and I know that she's worked with sort of other kind of different sort of genres as well. So yes, that it'll never happen, but it's or it's very unlikely to. But yes, she would be. I'd love to see what we came up with.
Never say never. We've now
Never
put
say
it
never.
out there. We've now put it out there.
We have.
And look, these conversations have power. We had a conversation with a musician in Germany, and after a show last week in Berlin, a gentleman walked up and said he came specifically because he saw them on our channel. So you never know. Maybe Nancy will tune it.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've been doing a fair amount of you've got a fair amount of live performances wrapped up. Where are some of the places that we can see you performing, between now and say the end of the year?
Well, I've kind of done quite a lot of my gigs now. I've got one coming up at the end of August. I've got a bit of time out, which is going to be useful from a recording point of view. And then I got one at the end of August on Monday. It's Bank Holiday Monday, but that won't mean anything to. I've got to find the date of it now. I've got to find my little paper diary. Isn't that cute? Look, I still
do it on paper.
Flick through the pages. I'm a bit old fashioned.
It's probably what end of August, beginning of September. I've been that bank holiday. I've been in the UK for that.
It's Bank Holiday Monday, which is I got on the page. There we go. 26th. Right. 26th of August. I'm opening the stage, so that'll be sort of around about 12:30, sort of midday, at the Wokingham Festival. And that one I think is a very up and coming festival. They've done it before, and I think that I'm quite excited to be doing that one. There's a lot of really good acts on. There's 2 stages, and I think that that will be a good one to do. So that will be that's the only other one this year that I've got booked. So my solo ones are nearly finished this year, and then I've got more next year. And then in October, I'm doing the whole of the UK tour with Steve Hackett and the band. So I'm joining them for all the UK dates this year. So that'll be exciting as well.
Well, let me ask you this question, because I actually got it from a friend of mine when I told him I was going to be speaking with you. Any chance you're ever going to join Steve and the band for the US dates?
Yeah, I mean, because I came over and did the US dates in 2010. It's an awful long time ago, isn't it? And that's when I was with them full time. I think the difficulty with the US dates is the tours are usually very long, and so it's an awful long time to be away from all the commitments I have here. If there is a shorter one, I'd be very tempted to, because I really enjoy playing over there all that time ago, and I often get asked, and I always I feel kind of badly that I don't go over, but as I say, if the tours are just so long, that's the problem for me. So we'll have to see. If they do a short tour, then I might make it over there, because I'd love to.
You know what? Your US fans can only hope that things work out. Because I know that everybody wants Steve and their band to play their city, right? I will tell you, it was amazing here in Dallas just about 6-7 weeks ago. he hadn't played in Dallas since 1986 or 87 when he was with GTR.
Oh,
It had
wow.
been that long.
Gosh,
Yeah.
that is a long
And
time.
that was an audience well waiting to hear him again. It was
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very loud evening. So,
Yeah.
um, what's a great way for people who want to discover your music or connect with you to find you? What are some of the best ways for people to build that fan connection?
Well, most of the information that anyone needs to find is on my website, which is amandalehmann.co.uk. I'm on Facebook, and Twitter. I call it Twitter, but I know it's X. Twittex, Instagram, YouTube. I haven't gone TikTok yet. So yes, I'm on all of those platforms, and yeah, but like I say, on my website, obviously there's links to all of those, and there's links to the web store that were my album and my other downloads. There's a couple of download albums as well on there. So yes, amandalehmann.co.uk is where you can find all about me.
And notice she said web store, so please go support her, buy some music. And look, TikTok, maybe you'll get there when you decide you make the pivot from songwriting and guitar playing into dance. Maybe then you'll decide to get on TikTok. I like to kind of bring these things to a head, and I think it's great insight for those who are watching, and for all of us to explore. While everybody should be out buying your album, and following you, etc., who are some kind of your top 3 or 4 musicians that you've been listening to lately that are either inspiring you, as you said earlier, or that you really just enjoy that you feel that other people should be opened up to as well?
Okay. Well, a lot of what I've listened to I have been listening to, which is very new, is some of the artists that I've actually collaborated with. And that's all new music. And I just think they've all sort of created some really good stuff. So I'd say if you want to find out about those, again, that's on my website. And there's just new music. If you're looking for new music, there's some great music there with all of those artists. Who have I been listening to? Well, actually, another thing that's quite interesting is that I've just done a festival fairly recently, the Soundall Music Festival, and that was like 10 bands. So I was one of those acts. And before doing it, I wanted to familiarise myself with their music, the music of all the other bands. So that's been really interesting as well. And one that I particularly have enjoyed listening to recently is the Black Heart Orchestra. I think that they've done some really lovely music. So I've been listening to them quite a bit, and all of the bands that were on. I don't know if you've heard of That's Joe Payne. He's sort of, I think he's an up and coming talent, and his music fascinated me because it's prog, but it also has other genres in it. I mean, it's he could almost be sort of, I don't know, sort of another Freddie Mercury, because he plays sort of the piano. He's a lot of classical influence in there, and he's also got a great sense of humor and does all this sort of crazy stuff, and it's really original. It's so hard to make really original music these days. So yes, he's fascinating, and then I do like to listen. I like as well as music that I find exciting or moving. Sometimes I kind of need something that just is kind of helps me to chill out, and I don't want it to kind of like make my head sort of too distracted. And I like to listen to like Clannad quite a lot. I find Clannad very calming. And then sort of even sort of slightly more gothy stuff like Delirium and sort of Enigma, those sort of things again. So it's a very different. I listen to them quite a lot just to kind of chill out. So that's kind of what I'm listening to at the moment. All sorts of bits and pieces. Yeah,
that's great. And now I've discovered a few. And I was at a festival last weekend. It was punk rock, and I found like 5 or 6 new bands that I'm totally enthralled with. 'Cause I like to go out. I like to go out running, and punk rock is very good for running. It gets you
Yeah.
going. So
Yeah.
I mean, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I learned so much about you that I never knew, and I hope that those watching, if you have questions, follow her. If you have questions, put them in the comments below. Thank you for joining us, both you, Amanda, and our audience. We really enjoy bringing kind of these different insights. It's not a flavor of the day. It's kind of a career and who you really are as a person and musician. So thanks so much for joining us on The Hang today.
Thank you, Scott. It's been lovely talking to you. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Good to talk to you. Talk to you soon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.